The following episode contains a story talking about domestic violence. If you feel that you are in an abusive relationship, you can call the National Abuse Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. They are available 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Listeners' discretion is advised.
Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times, it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were life-jacked.
What do you do when the person you trust to love you instead begins to isolate you from friends and family so they can hurt you? My name is Dr. Rowe, and this is Life-Jacked, the Resilience Podcast. Life-jacked is when an unfortunate or unplanned event happens to jack with your life. My guest for this week, Sarah Hmel, will share 4 key warning signs that an abusive partner may display that she wished she had recognized earlier on in her relationship. She is the mother of 2 and a Manhattan-based hospitality consultant. Through her writing, she not only tells her story of survival, but also seeks to raise awareness about the behavior patterns and red flags associated with abusive personalities. Entangled in Blue is a powerful narrative that serves as both a cautionary tale and a source of empowerment for those who may find themselves entangled in the same web of abuse. Hi, Sarah. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Can you briefly share your personal journey and experience of abuse within a romantic relationship?
Sure. So I was in an abusive relationship for over 20 years and didn't know it. And I really thought that I had this great life, and I was proud of the life that I built with my husband. And I owned a couple of restaurants, and one of my restaurants was ambushed by Food Network's Restaurant Impossible. And I knew that they were going to feature some of the arguments that I had with my husband for entertainment value, but I really expected that episode to focus on our tiny little kitchen we had and some of the logistical issues that we had with the space and how they did a full renovation for us and redecorated our restaurants. I did not expect the focal point of the episode to be the abusive dynamic between me and my husband. And when I first watched that episode, it was like having an out-of-body experience, and I didn't recognize the person I was. And so that started the process of trying to figure out, how did I get into this situation and how is I going to get out of it? And in the process of me trying to get out of it, I think my husband got scared that I was leaving and I was taking the kids, and he shot a gun in front of my 2 kids that came inches away from my head. So that started the whole other process of my entire life crashing down around me and how I was going to rebuild it. I had no choice but to leave my home, my business that I spent my entire life building, and I had to start all over again. And so basically my book that I wrote was my journey on figuring out how I got into this, how was I going to get out of it, but then also taking a step back and what were the warning signs that I ignored, and there were a lot. If I can save one life by giving folks the courage to trust their own intuition, recognize those signs, and step away before it's too late. Because the longer you end up in a relationship with someone who has an abusive personality, the harder and harder it is to leave.
And speaking of courage, how did you find the courage to break free from the cycle of abuse once you recognized it?
When he shot the gun in our bedroom in front of our two kids that nearly missed my head, I came face to face with my own mortality. And I had no choice. I knew that if I stayed with him, it was only a matter of time that he was going to finish the job that he wasn't able to finish. And it's just amazing how I still don't know how I found the courage to leave, but it was like literally my survival instincts kicked in.
What were some of the biggest challenges you faced during your healing journey after this experience?
So what I'm finding out now is that I literally had to grieve the illusion that I had of what my life was. And the shame that I had to overcome in just feeling so foolish that I had no idea. I did not identify as being in an abusive relationship. But looking back now and seeing all of these warning signs and seeing how these incidents increased in frequency and severity, I really had to, first of all, grieve that, the loss of what I thought my life was. And then I found myself stuck in the questions phase. Why did he do this? Why would anyone try to kill themselves and their family? And it's been 6 years and I'm still starting to figure that out. But it took me, I ended up researching personality disorders and what types of people actually tried to kill themselves and their family, and trying to figure out, to make sense of the senseless and try to get into his head to figure out why he would even do this. And so I couldn't move on unless I had an explanation. And I still really don't. I'm piecing the puzzles together, and the puzzle's almost done, but that's been the toughest part.
In what ways do you feel that this experience affected or even maybe shaped your perspective on relationships and trust?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one because, this is somebody who we should have trusted the most. And that betrayal is very hard to get over. And then on top of that, the betrayal of, I didn't realize how isolated I was from my support system, my entire family and friends, and the betrayal of people that told me after what happened and what I experienced that I still needed to support my husband, and that I took a vow, and not really giving me that emotional support when I needed it the most. So being able to trust people has been something that I'll probably spend the rest of my life working on.
It's interesting that you said that you were going through the worst experience of your life. Someone was harming you, and you were told that you have to still support your husband because you took a vow.
My own father said that.
Right. And, wow, some people, are ignorant. I'm just going to call it that, and ask really stupid questions. Or they, just like in this situation, respond in the most inappropriate way to hearing of a situation like this one. Other than that one, were there other encounters or any misconceptions or judgments?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one and the most frustrating one I get is, why didn't you just leave? It's not that simple. First of all, I did leave eventually, and he always found me. I had to change jobs every 6 months. I had to move 3 times. And then I went from being so isolated to feeling further isolated because I couldn't talk to anyone who mutually knew him, because people would still innocently, well, I didn't mean to tell him where you're living. or give some clue that he was able to piece together from 5 other clues where I was, or he even filed for full custody. So a family court battle ensued. And so he would take these tiny little pieces of evidence and twist it all around to claim that this is proof that I was an unfit mother when he was trying to gain custody, which is all a complete lie. Figuring out what email that I had and then logging into my Amazon account and sending random things from my credit card to where I lived. And that's how he found my address. Like all of these things. And it's just so frustrating. People are like, why didn't you just leave? Like, there's no escaping this type of person. Like, you can physically leave, but they can remotely make your life miserable. It's not that simple. And if you leave, you upset them even more. So sometimes it's actually safer, almost Stockholm syndrome, to stay in the situation for a time and then set a really ironclad safety plan. But again, not that simple.
I understand. Well, Sarah, I just want to commend you for being brave and knowing that you needed to get out and finding a way out. I want to shift and I want to talk about, more positive aspects of this situation, meaning could you talk about the support systems or any resources that were instrumental in helping you to rebuild your life?
Yeah, so when I moved to New York, I ended up finding an organization, which is absolutely amazing organization called WARM. It stands for We All Really Matter. And by the way, this is before the Black Lives Matter movement. But Stephanie McGraw created this organization, understanding what she went through and then navigating a broken system when it comes to escaping domestic violence and literally creating navigators to help those who are trying to escape these abusive dynamics. And so luckily for me, I had already gotten out of it, but I was navigating a court system. And to the point where they'll even come with you just to sit with you at court so you have somebody. And that was just so invaluable to me, not even just like the support that they give you, but understanding that I wasn't alone. And this whole experience, again, so isolating, and then like totally losing your support system and then not even be able to contact people that mutually knew him. The fact that I wasn't the only person going through this was so invaluable. And then as I'm figuring out the pattern of abuse, finding out there's so many similarities into what survivors experience. And that became kind of the glue of my book when it comes to identifying what these patterns are and the abuse tactics that abusers use and some of the psychological things that happen when you're in the thick of it. You have no idea, but as you're able to take a step back and look, it all is so clear.
Are there any organizations, or other than, of course, WARM, that you've been involved in or initiatives you've been involved in to help raise awareness about domestic violence?
So here's kind of the tricky thing. So once I was able to get the support system, then COVID happened. And quarantine re-isolated us all over again. And I really needed a support group and a support system, and I kind of lost that. And so as I was trying to at least come up with some form of community, I found some podcasts. One of them, The Narcissist Apocalypse, and then also The Place We Find Ourselves. And The Place We Find Ourselves, which is hosted by Adam Young, that stresses the support or the value and the power of our story. And so I was able to take a look back at my story and start writing down what happened. And then The Narcissist Apocalypse is survivors that actually go on there and tell their story. And it kind of felt like almost like being in a support group and listening to everyone sharing their story. And 30 episodes in is really when I like, wait a minute. All of our stories are the same, yet so different with the details, but the pattern is the same. So with those, again, during quarantine, it was really tough, and that kind of got me through. And then now I'm still really looking for that sense of community. I are with Warm and the support systems they have, they're back up and running, but they're all remote. So that's another thing that I'm looking for, is just being able to, like, there's so much value in person and creating a sense of community. And as you come out of something like this, especially after it's so isolating.
And you have a book, Entangled in Blue. How did you decide to write this book, and what exactly does Entangled in Blue, what does it mean?
Sure. So the title itself, I was listening to the song Tangled Up in Blue, and it was a rare version of a Bob Dylan song, and it hit me. It was like, I think it was verse 6, and he remade it like I think 3 or 4 times. And it said, he was always in a hurry, too busy or too stoned, and everything she wanted to do had to be postponed. He thought they were successful. She thought that they were rich with objects and material things, but I was never impressed. And when it all came crashing down, I became withdrawn. The only thing I knew how to do is keep on keeping on like a bird that flew, tangled up in blue. And it hit me, and I was like, that verse is exactly kind of the way I felt in that moment. And there is a abuse tactic called entanglement, and it's basically when there's this blur of boundaries, and you become so entangled into someone else's feelings and emotions. And so that's literally what the issue was between me and my husband. So I decided to title it Entangled in Blue. And the actual story, like I said, I was listening to that podcast, and it was literally therapy, story work therapy. And I just started from the beginning. And I started from the beginning from my childhood, and some of that stuff I left out, and started the book with when I kind of figured out that I was in this abusive relationship after watching the Restaurant Impossible episode, and then leading up to him shooting the gun in front of my children that nearly missed my head. And then my journey of escaping and getting out of that situation. And then it came to a point where his fireman chaplain called me to try and offer support. And he's like, can you tell me how you guys met and how you got together and how you ended up in this place that you're in right now? And I told him everything. And so in my book, as I wrote it out, I had no idea that I was explaining the abuse cycle and the pattern and all of the tactics that he used. I just thought I was telling him how we got together and how we ended up here. But looking back, it was so clear. And after researching all these personality disorders and attending the support groups and listening to the podcasts and other survivor stories, that's when I was able to really name the abuse cycle and the tactics that were used. And so there's so much power in naming what these things are. And to be able to take that step back and see that the pattern and the incidents increased in frequency and severity over time.
So have you been in touch with your ex-husband recently? I know you said this is about 6 years ago.
He passed away. He died on September 10th, 2021. And that is one thing where he was all over social media saying that COVID was a hoax, refused to get vaccinated, traveled internationally and refused to wear a mask, did not try to follow any preventative measures. And the last time my kids saw him was in court-ordered in-person visitation, which I tried to tell the court. There's no vaccine available for the kids, and he's out there very open about his views about COVID. And they made a policy that he had to take a test and prove that he was negative. And according to medical records, he produced a false negative test. He was infected when he saw the kids. The following day, he went to the doctor, refused a COVID test because he didn't think COVID existed, demanded to have the Z-Pack because he was convinced that he had a sinus infection. A week later, he got worse. He went back to the doctor. His pulse ox is so low that he shouldn't have been alive. So he was immediately sent to the hospital and intubated right away. And he spent 2 weeks on the ventilator. And his sister, who was his next of kin, made the decision to take him off life support.
So once you heard about his passing, what emotions did you feel?
So I had to grieve all over again. And first of all, I never realized how much in fear I actually lived until that threat was gone. But that was replaced with severe sadness of it never needed to be this way. And I still loved the person that I fell in love with. And to have this whole thing play out the way it did and happen, it was just so sad. And also, we still had our house, our marital home that he was living in, and I thought it was full of COVID. So I couldn't sleep. So I drove back down to North Carolina, and early in the morning, I walked into my own house. There was a truck in the driveway, and I didn't recognize the truck. I'm like, oh, he must have gotten a new truck. The door was unlocked. The garage door was open. I walked into the side door, and I walk in, and I see a teenage kid sitting in my living room. And I'm like, hi, who are you? And he must have been scared to see me. And then I look, and I find like a whole family of people in my house. And this person comes barreling down the stairs who knew my name. Sarah, what are you doing in here? And I'm like, okay, who are you? Why are you here? And he claims that he bought the house for my husband. But we were still legally married, and there's no way that would have been legal, and I would have had to sign off on it. And I actually had the deed with me. For some reason, I had a feeling that I should print it out. And so I was like, okay, well, you know what my name is. Can I have your name? Wouldn't give it to me. Wouldn't tell me who he was. I was devastated. So I walk outside, and I called his sister, and I was like, who are these people? And she wouldn't tell me who they are. And then she tells me that I didn't know he had a girlfriend, and he had been living with a girlfriend for the past 6 months. And I found out later that this family was her sister and her sister's whole family. And I still didn't have a name. So I called the police, and they're like, well, there's an eviction moratorium in place, and they clearly have lived here for a while. They're getting mail here. So you have to go through the eviction process. So it's like, I don't want to have to do that. And I was willing to like work something out with this family, but they wouldn't speak to me. They're like, he just died. You got a lot of nerve walking in here. And I was like, I didn't realize there was an etiquette for walking into my home. And I ended up having to get a lawyer. We went through the eviction process. When they left, they took a sledgehammer to the granite countertops. They poured paint all over the hardwood floors. They spread motor oil all over the house, on the walls. They put motor oil in the toilets. But worst of all is the messages that they wrote all over the walls saying, Sarah, Justin hated you. You're a murderer. You killed Justin. And they wrote a message to our children saying, your mother lied to you. There's a woman who has your things, all of the stuff that we couldn't take with us, that we left behind in the house. And when you're old enough, she'll come and find you and tell you the truth.
Wow.
I was so sick to my stomach that I couldn't even use the bathroom because there was motor oil in the toilets. So just when I thought I couldn't deal with anymore, that just did me in. And I walked out of the house and like I gave up. And so one of my friends was like, no, I'm not going to let you do this. And he helped me with the insurance and got the house repaired, and we sold it for literally what I owed on the mortgage.
Wow, I cannot believe that you went through all of that. That it was just, like you said, you found the courage to get away. You got away, started to rebuild your life. Of course, he still had to have contact with the children, which is, understandable. He's their father. But then to know that the part two to all of this, even after he is gone, it's just amazing. What do you believe? You say there are some key warning signs that could possibly be an indicator that a person, like their partner, could be potentially abusive. So what are those red flags, or what are those key warning signs, in your opinion?
So when someone hurts your feelings, you should be able to have a healthy, calm conversation with that person. And if they care at all about your feelings, they would have the ability to have that conversation without feeling threatened. And that's one thing that I was never able to have with him. Any time that we had a conversation, it ended up being a fight, and it would escalate, and it would go around and around, which is what survivors called circular conversations, to the point where I would feel dizzy. I would be sick to my stomach. I would feel nauseous, and I would feel physically exhausted. And I would forget the whole point of I would forget what we're even talking about, because they were so skilled at changing the subject to turn things back around on me. So one of the biggest signs when it comes to the abuse cycle is it's called DARVO. So deny, attack, reverse victim offender. So say, and anybody, like any relationship, your feelings are going to get hurt at some point. It's all about how you can make it through that hurdle. So say, for example, your feelings get hurt. Hey, you know what? I really didn't like how I felt when this happened. And all of a sudden they start, well, it's your fault. I wouldn't have done that had you, and then so you're like, oh, well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. And then you always, and so there's these absolutes that get used. You always do this all the time. And then you feel confused, like, do I? I don't always do that. And so there's all these different tactics, which I identify in the book. But really what it is this reversing their actions onto the other person, saying, you have so much control over me that your actions influenced me to do this back to you, which is just, it's insane, is what it is. So anytime you kind of notice that, and most of the time people don't, but what they notice is, wow, my head, like, I feel dizzy. I feel nauseous. after having this conversation. What just happened? Like you almost feel like whiplash. So that's a really good sign. And then all the tactics, they vary, and there's a lot of common tactics that abusers use, which I explain in the book, and I just basically talk about my experience. This is what happened, and then I know now that this is the tactic that he used.
What advice would you give to someone who is currently in an abusive relationship and they're just unsure of how to leave?
So I can't really give one piece of advice because everyone's situation is completely different. But just know that you're not alone, and I think that feeling and realizing that is very powerful. But call the domestic violence hotline and get help. That's what they're there for. And sometimes I've talked to survivors, and like, it was no help. So if you do that and you're still feeling lost, if you have someone you trust, but sometimes people don't. They don't trust anybody because the situation that they're in makes them not trust anybody. And honestly, I didn't have anyone that I could trust. So the best thing is to come up with a safety plan. And that can be really tricky too. So, but you can't let the abuser know what your plan is. You can't threaten them to leave. You can't, because their biggest fear is abandonment. And that's something that it took me a long time to learn. And if they feel like there's a chance that you're going to leave, that's when they up the ante and things can get really violent and dangerous.
In your opinion, what are the best ways to build resilience?
So that's a really good question. When I told my therapist all the stuff that I went through, first thing she asked me was, how have you not had a nervous breakdown yet? And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. And then she said, you must have built up a lot of resiliency from childhood. And so I kind of took a look back at that, and I guess I didn't realize how resilient I was as a child. I was an only child, living with parents that my dad was a Vietnam veteran with PTSD, and my mom did the best that she could to survive with him. And looking back now, I was used as a pawn. I was triangulated every step of the way between the both of them. And then I grew up with undiagnosed, untreated dyslexia. So it's amazing that I was able to become a published author, that alone. And I grew up thinking that there was something wrong with me, not knowing what was wrong with me. And I was bullied a lot, which reinforced this belief that there was something wrong with me. And I think I got used to being treated badly, and I grew a thick skin. And I joke that if there's a job that builds character, it's being a cashier at a Wegmans in Buffalo, New York, because people can say the most hurtful things to you, and you can't say anything back. And I remember going home and just crying after my shifts. And that alone taught me to build a thick skin, and that no one has the ability to make me feel bad about myself unless I give them permission to. And I think that's why I stayed in this abusive relationship so long, because something in me emotionally shut down, and I did allow people to treat me badly, but I didn't let it emotionally affect me, and it ended up manifesting in chronic physical pain. My neck, my clenched jaw, back pain, autoimmune diseases. After the Restaurant Impossible episode aired, I had a severe bladder infection. And the doctor literally told me that it was due to extreme stress. Looking back now that I'm an adult and I have complete control over who I surround myself with, probably the best advice that I was ever given is surround yourself with like-minded people. And I don't need to be around mean people anymore. And even in the workplace, I know my value, and I don't need to stay in an abusive job. It's not worth my mental health and risk. And it took me a long time moving here to Manhattan to find a good place and be in the position to be able to not sacrifice my mental health for my livelihood.
Well, Sarah, you are absolutely resilient, and I really want to thank you so much for your time and being vulnerable enough to share your story with the listeners. I really appreciate you. Can you please take the time?
Thank you.
Can you please take the time to let everyone know how they can purchase your book or contact you for speaking engagements?
Sure. It's Entangled in Blue, and it's available on Amazon or my website, entangledinblue.com. And you can message me directly through the website or sipwsarah@gmail.com.
Any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
You're not alone. There are so many people that are suffering in silence right now, and there are so many people who are afraid to share their story because they're afraid of how people will react to it. And that's why you feel so alone, because nobody wants to talk about this, and it's happening. And you do have the power. I know right now, if you're in a situation right now, you feel helpless and you're so far deep in a hole that you have no idea how to dig yourself out. But I promise you it's worth it. You don't have to suffer in silence anymore. And there are so many people and organizations that are available that are willing to help you. And if you call that 1-800 number and it's no help, just keep calling until you get someone that can help you. And Google, and there's so many other different resources that are out there. You just have to know where to look for them. And my book kind of lays that out too. There's several different sources there for you too, depending on what your situation is.
As Sarah said, if you feel that you are in an abusive relationship and you are wanting to get out, you can call the National Domestic Abuse Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Again, that is 1-800-799-7233. They are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are people there that speak Spanish, English, and any other languages. They have interpreters available. Please make sure that you no longer expose yourself to this violence and abuse. Protect yourself.
One thing to add too, if you're in the middle of a situation, don't be afraid to call 911. If someone's threatening you physically and you or your children, call 911 and don't be afraid.
Sarah, I wish you nothing but blessings and abundance to you and your family. It was such a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you so much for being brave. Please take care.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Life Jacked, the Resilience Podcast with your host, Dr. Rowe. Are you interested in having your business or service advertised on this podcast for thousands of listeners to hear? Then please send me an email at lifejacked@email.com if you are interested in becoming a sponsor of one of my episodes. And remember to live, laugh, love, learn, and then repeat. See you in the next episode.